lied and used fake documents to obtain the interview with my mother, made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
Prince William recently stumbled upon something that completely shattered his world. Digging through royal archives, he found a hidden letter penned by none other than King Charles. Just days after Princess Diana's death, King Charles ordered the palace to keep her journal and tapes away from the children. For 3 long decades, neither William nor Harry was given access to their mother's last message. So, what exactly was Diana's last message, and how will it affect the royal family now? Join us as we expose the heartbreaking details of Diana's last message to her little boys. Prince William's shocking discovery. It happened on a quiet afternoon, the kind when nothing out of the ordinary was expected. Prince William had been granted private access to a sealed wing of the royal archives, a section few ever touched. At first, it felt like just another routine visit. Stacks of letters, official notes, and personal memorabilia filled the room like forgotten parts of royal history. But as he sifted through a pile of files kept under some aged photo albums, his hand brushed against something thin, fragile, and oddly placed. It was an envelope, yellowed by time, the paper brittle around the edges. Something about the letter pulled his attention. He opened it slowly, expecting perhaps a forgotten condolence letter or a misfiled address note. However, what he found instead will shock you. William found something entirely different. Handwriting he recognized. It was his father's. The date scrawled in the corner stopped him cold. It was written just days after his mother, Princess Diana, had died. That alone would have been enough to make him pause, but as his eyes moved over the first few lines, his breath paused. It wasn't a message of grief, it wasn't a personal reflection. It was a directive, careful and deliberate, and it ordered palace staff to suppress specific items. King Charles also wanted them to suppress Diana's journal and a set of voice recordings she had left behind. You see, for many years, William believed that he knew everything there was to know about his mother's final days. The news reports, the documentaries, the private conversations, they had all painted a picture, blurred maybe, but complete. Yet here was a letter that cracked that image open like glass. He had never known these recordings or journals even existed. His mother had spoken to her sons from beyond the grave, and someone, his father, had chosen to keep that from him. The realization didn't hit like anger, not immediately. It settled like a cold weight in his chest. He reread the letter over and over, looking for anything to soften the message, any clue that maybe he was misunderstanding its intent. But it was clear. Diana had left behind words for her children, and those words were kept away under orders that had never been meant for his eyes. The betrayal cut deep, not because it came from an enemy, but because it came from the one man who should have stood by him, not shielded him from the one voice he had longed to hear since childhood. What exactly had Diana said? Why were her voice and final thoughts considered too dangerous to share? William's mind flooded with questions he couldn't answer. The recordings could have contained her fears, her warnings, or even her apologies. Whatever they held, his father had judged them unfit for his son's ears. And that judgment had stood, unchallenged, for nearly 30 years. This letter wasn't just a piece of paper. It was proof of a decision that changed everything. That is not all. It represented silence, control, and the deliberate erasure of Diana's final expressions of love, regret, or truth. William felt the old grief stir again, but this time it didn't come alone. It came with confusion, hurt, and the terrible pain of discovering that even in death, his mother had been edited by the institution she once served, and by the man she once married. For a moment, all the polished speeches and carefully maintained images of royal unity faded. William was no longer the prince bound by duty and protocol. He was just a son, standing in a dusty room, holding evidence that his mother's last wishes had been hidden from him. He thought of all the times he had defended the crown, of the sacrifices made to protect its image. Now he wondered what had been sacrificed in return: his healing, his connection to Diana, and a piece of the past that might have helped him understand everything better. The more he sat with the letter, the more he realized this wasn't just about secrecy. This was about control, about deciding which truths deserved to survive and which were better left buried. And if the tapes truly existed, if somewhere in that archive was his mother's actual voice, then it meant he had missed out on hearing her speak directly to him during his most vulnerable years. Not just stories about her, not someone else's interpretation, but her voice, her truth. And then came the question he had been avoiding. Was Camilla part of this? William had heard the name too many times across the years, seen the tension it brought to headlines and family photos alike. But if Diana had spoken about Camilla in those recordings, and if Charles had read or heard that firsthand, it could explain the urgency in suppressing them. That possibility made everything even more tangled, because now it wasn't just about grief or legacy. It was about power, image, and survival inside the most watched family on Earth. William sat back, the letter still in his hand, and as much as it hurt, there was something else building under the surface. Because whatever came next, he knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning, and he was determined to confront his father over the letter. He finally got the chance to do that at a royal meeting. Keep watching for the stunning details. William confronts King Charles. You might be wondering why William's meeting with King Charles was never widely reported. Well, according to palace sources, the meeting didn't happen during a formal event or inside a grand ceremonial room. There were no cameras, no press, and no aides nearby. It was just William and Charles in one of the palace's more private spaces, the kind where serious things were discussed far away from public eyes. William had requested the meeting personally, and Charles agreed without asking questions. William didn't come with notes or speeches. He had only one thing on his mind, one simple question that had been burning ever since he read that letter in the archive. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it cut deeper than anything else could have. His father looked at him, caught off guard by the simplicity of what William asked. There were no formalities, just pain. The kind that comes when someone you trusted makes a choice that breaks something inside you. Charles didn't answer right away. When he did, his words were meant to ease the blow. He said he had done it to protect William, that hearing Diana's voice would have been too painful at the time. He claimed it was an act of love, a way to shield his son from fresh wounds when the old ones hadn't even healed. But William didn't feel protected. He felt robbed. The words, no matter how gently they were spoken, didn't land the way Charles intended. What William saw wasn't care or kindness. He saw control. He saw someone who took it upon himself to decide what his son should or shouldn't know about his mother. That wasn't protection. That was power being used to bury a truth that belonged to someone else. The choice hit William harder than he expected. He realized he had gone through his entire adult life without knowing his mother had left behind messages meant just for him and Harry. He had grown up believing he had already heard her last words, but that wasn't true. The conversation didn't stay calm for long. The tension in the room began to build. William's voice grew sharper, his questions came faster, and the emotion that had stayed bottled up began to spill out. He wanted to know who else knew. He wanted to understand how many people had helped keep this secret. And most of all, he wanted to hear his mother for himself, in her voice, not through someone else's version. Charles didn't give clear answers. He stayed vague, using words that avoided the heart of the matter. That only made things worse. The more Charles tried to soften the story, the more William felt the sting of everything that had been taken from him. The exchange became too much. William didn't shout, but sources admit that the frustration was visible. His face, his hands, his eyes, everything about him showed the toll this truth had taken, and then, suddenly, it ended. He turned and walked out without another word, leaving the door behind him swinging gently in his wake. He didn't speak to anyone after that. Not his aides, not his team, not even his children. He returned to his private quarters and locked the door. Inside, he carried the journal and tapes with him, holding them close like pieces of his mother, who had finally returned. We are just getting to the interesting part of the video, so stay tuned for what comes next. William stayed there until the next morning, lights on through the night, curtains closed. No noise except for the low sounds of Diana's voice on tape, filling the room with words he had never heard before. He read through the journal slowly, page by page. Some of it was hard to take in. The writing was raw, the thoughts unfiltered, and the pain on the page was real. For William, this wasn't just a memory. It was a reintroduction to a side of his mother the world never got to know. He listened carefully, trying to hear not just what she said, but why she said it. Every page, every whispered word gave him something new to think about. Not just about her, but about the life he had been raised in. Kate was the only one allowed into that space. She didn't ask questions. She didn't try to give advice. She just sat with him, bringing quiet presence when nothing else would have helped. She understood that he wasn't just reading his mother's words. He was watching the ground shift under his feet. The past wasn't what he thought it was. The story of Diana's last months, the decisions made after her death, and the image of his father as a protector all looked different now. William began to see things through a new lens. The crown, the titles, the duty. None of it felt as clean as it once did. He had always known the royal family came with pressure and responsibility. But now he understood something better. Behind the public smiles were choices that shaped the lives of real people, including his own. And those choices weren't always made in love or truth. Some were made out of fear, image, and self-preservation. This moment didn't break William, but it did change him. The man who had spent his life serving a system had just learned that same system had kept something sacred from him. He wasn't just a future king anymore. He was a son with a decision to make, one that might redefine what the crown means to him from this point forward. But that leads us to another interesting question. What is the content of Princess Diana's last tapes and journals? Prepare your mind, because what we're about to reveal might shatter everything you thought you knew about Princess Diana's last days. Princess Diana's last message. Diana had been gone for many years, but in that quiet room with the old tapes and her journal pages, her voice came back to life. Her words weren't written for history books or press coverage. They were meant only for William and Harry, two boys she adored, two sons she feared the crown would one day swallow whole. According to sources close to William, Diana's voice wasn't just emotional, it was powerful. It was filled with warnings she wasn't allowed to say out loud while alive, feelings too dangerous to share at the time, and hopes that her sons would one day understand the truth behind the silence. What made it all hit even harder was how personal it felt. They were raw, full of emotion, full of pain, and completely unfiltered. Diana had poured out her heart in moments of deep sadness and fear. She had spoken about betrayal, about the crushing weight of isolation, and the cold walls of the palace that once felt more like a prison than a home. Her words painted a different picture of royal life, far from the fairy tale everyone imagined. In the tapes, her voice trembled as she spoke of moments where she felt like she was vanishing, erased not just from her marriage, but from the future her sons would one day inherit. She spoke about Camilla with a sharpness that couldn't be softened. It wasn't bitterness, it was worry. Diana feared that the woman who had once lived in the shadows of her marriage would rise to a place of influence inside the monarchy. She questioned what kind of example would be set, what message it would send, if the same system that had once broken her would later reward the people who helped do it. It was a quiet alarm bell ringing across time, one that William now couldn't ignore. That is not all. The journal offered something even more intimate. Her writing, though messy and emotional, read like a conversation between mother and son. She wrote about her love for them, how much she missed them, how terrified she was that they'd grow up without her guidance. She feared they'd be shaped by royal expectations and public pressure, more than love and truth. One simple and haunting line made William lose control. She had remembered something he told her as a small boy, a promise made through tears when she felt alone. Reading it again in her handwriting broke something in him. Kate stood by him throughout it all, not trying to fix anything but refusing to let him go through it alone. She was angry, not at Diana, but at the choices that had kept these messages hidden for so long. She believed William had the right to this truth much earlier, and her anger wasn't quiet. It burned with the fire of a wife watching her husband crumble under something that should have brought healing, not years of emptiness. Kate wasn't just standing beside William emotionally, she was ready to protect him from whatever came next. That readiness was necessary because the palace had already found out. Word had spread throughout the palace that William was going through Diana's records. Behind the gates of Buckingham Palace, meetings began almost immediately. Advisors, press officers, and senior aides were trying to understand what William had discovered and what he might do with it. This wasn't just family drama. It was a potential disaster that could shake public trust, open old wounds, and even question the foundation of the current monarchy. PR plans were dusted off, damage control strategies reviewed, and media contacts were quietly prepped for a shift in narrative. William didn't care about that. What mattered to him now was what Diana wanted, and she had wanted both her sons to hear her. For that reason, he made the call. It wasn't long or detailed, but it carried enough weight to make Harry stop whatever he was doing and listen. William told him something had changed, and that maybe, just maybe, their mother could do something in death that no one could manage in life, bring them back to a place of shared purpose. Diana's voice, once silenced by those who feared it, was now the loudest one echoing through the palace walls. And she wasn't whispering. She was roaring. The question on everyone's mind now is, what comes next? And that's where we are headed next. Stay glued. Public reaction and William's decision. Once the reports leaked to the press, everything changed. It started as a whisper among those who followed royal news closely. Then suddenly it was not quiet anymore. A tabloid published the story that Diana's private tapes had been found. More than that, they said Prince William now had them. Within hours, headlines spread across continents. And within days, the world was back in conversation about a voice they had long missed. Diana's name was not just a memory anymore. It was a spark. What followed was beyond everyone's expectations. All across social media, one phrase kept popping up again and again. Let Diana speak. It was more than a hashtag. It grew into a movement. Strangers from around the world shared their love for her. They posted clips, quotes, drawings, and memories. New generations who never knew her while she was alive felt connected to her story. Diana deserved to be heard. Her sons deserved to know her fully, and the world deserved to understand what happened behind the palace doors all those years ago. Videos of her interviews were shared all over again, but now with new meaning. People connected what she had said in public back then with what might be buried in those tapes. The emotion around her felt fresh, and it was stirring something deeper. Inside the palace, the atmosphere changed. The attention was not on William anymore. It shifted quickly to King Charles. People began asking if he was really trying to protect the monarchy or simply trying to protect himself. The line between duty and guilt started to blur, and outside the palace gates, the pressure kept growing. Then there was Camilla. Even though many had tried over the years to ease her into public affection, Diana's voice brought back old wounds. The things Diana had said about Camilla were not meant to shame her. They were fears, truths from a woman who had lived it. But now, those private thoughts were out in the open. And once again, the public began to question what kind of image the royal family had tried to build compared to what was going on inside. All this left William in a place no prince had stood before. He had two choices. One was silence. He could do what royals always did: stay quiet, protect the crown, and let the storm pass. Or he could step into the unknown and do what no one expected. He could let Diana speak. Not for the public to gossip, but for the truth to finally live outside the palace. Either choice came with a heavy weight. One would preserve the old system. The other might break it. With all that in mind, William thought about someone else, Prince Harry. According to royal watchers, the two had not been close for a while. But this was not just royal business. It was their mother. And part of him believed Diana might have left the recordings for both of them to hear together. William began to wonder if giving them to Harry before doing anything public might be the right step. While the outside world was cheering for change, inside the palace, things were getting hot, and the reason was not what you think. Senior royals saw this moment as dangerous, not just because of what Diana had said, but because of what it meant for the future of the crown. It was about a bigger shift, about a new generation that did not believe in silence for the sake of tradition. The divide was clear. The past wanted quiet. The future wanted honesty. And so William sat with the hardest decision of his life. It was not just about his title anymore. It was about his legacy. Was he going to be the king who followed the rules, or the son who stood up for truth? The choice he made next would either keep the crown exactly as it had always been, or begin to shape it into something entirely new. Whatever he chose, it was clear that the world was no longer watching in silence. They were listening, hoping, and waiting. And Diana, whose voice was once silenced, was finally rising again, not as a memory, but as a force. Thank you for staying with us. What do you think William will do next? Share your opinions with us in the comments section. If you enjoyed the video, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Also, click the following video on your screen, and you will enjoy it.